podcast. I'm here with Dr. Zori Paul and Natalie Jeung, host of Therapy on a Tangent. This is a podcast that brings in all the things that they love to nerd out about and mental health together. I'm really excited for this conversation because it means that we can consider other options for how we show up online. It may be that you dream about a podcast, but the reality is you're probably not going to do it unless it's with a friend. And if that's you, I'm really excited for this conversation. Podcasting can be a lot of fun. Zori, would you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, folks. My name is Zori Paul, she, her pronouns. I'm a counselor educator, researcher, and clinical mental health counselor. And yeah, I am one of the co-hosts for Therapy on Tangent with Natalie.
Natalie, your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Jeung, also she, her pronouns. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in the Chicagoland area. I am a therapist in solo private practice right now, and it's been a cool adventure being solo. I was in group practice before this and working with a lot of people, and now I'm just kind of on my own. So it's been an interesting transition. So it's been a good time.
Now, Zori was just saying that you met during your master's program. Tell me a little bit about that.
I don't know if we want to say names, but yeah, we went to the same master's program back in, what was it, 2016?
2016, yep.
Yeah, 2016. And I think that's how we met. And I think at some point we realized we went to the same high school, though we didn't know each other.
Such a small world.
Yeah. And yeah, I think at just some point we kind of just talked and realized we had the same interests, and we kept in touch, in like contact. I don't know if there's anything more.
I feel like whenever we talk about how we met in grad school, it's like that moment during like orientation when you're just looking around and you're just like, okay, who do I try to make friends with? Who do I try to connect with? And we joke about this because I think like sometimes like as a minority student, you look around and you look for other minority students to try to connect with. So I think like that's kind of when Zori and I just kind of like connected and was like, hey, let's try to get to know each other. It's really awkward for the both of us here. So we're just roughing it out together. So that was the start of our friendship.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you shared that because I've had that experience myself, and I feel like sometimes if there wasn't that other person of color, especially a woman of color in the room, that discomfort like didn't always leave. So thank you for being open about that. Which one of you had the idea for podcast first? How did that come about?
So Natalie. I had this idea for such a long time because something that I really enjoyed as a therapist was what I would call like cooler conversations, where hypothetically, if we had a water cooler, we would probably be standing around it with other therapists and just chatting about like our work and chatting about things that we see in the world and things like that. And something that I always loved talking about was just like psychology themes that we see in like media, video games, things like that. And so like that was the premise of like what I was hoping to do and talk more about. It wasn't that I had intended to like, I'm going to create like the best podcast ever. It was just like, I just want to have these cool conversations with other therapists and talk about like these nerdy topics and mental health and things like that. And Zori, since we shared so many similar interests, she was somebody that I really wanted to like just talk about, because this is what we talked about when we were in grad school, and this is what we talked about, you know, when we became therapists too. So it felt natural to just kind of roll into that as a podcast.
Yeah, and also I had wanted to do podcasts as well for a while. I just knew I didn't want to do it by myself. So then I think it was over lunch. Like we had like a lunch date. Natalie was just like, hey, you want to do a podcast? I was like, yes. And it also works out that like Natalie has had prior experiences with podcasts. So she knew some of the behind the scene technical stuff. And I'm good with the social media. So it was just like, yes, you do all the editing, I'll do all the social media. We stick to our strengths.
Yeah, social media is not my strength. So I'm so thankful all the time that Zori just handles all that. And I just do what I do with like video editing and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I will say, Natalie took a break for the last few episodes of our season, and I had to do the editing. I was like, I can do it, but Natalie does it so much better.
So it's not just a friendship, but like you really recognize each other's strengths and also what you're like wanting to do with your time. It sounds like it kind of naturally fell in a way that works for all of the things you might need for a podcast. Is there anything that like neither of you like to do?
I feel like it's not that we don't like to do it. It's just sometimes it's just like how we do it is like brainstorming for like podcast ideas. Sometimes we're just like, I don't know, what do you want to do? Or like, who's going to intro it? Or who's going to like keep us on track? Because both of us can, I mean, that's part of the reason why it's called Therapy on a Tangent. Both of us can go on tangents for a really long time.
Yeah. And I think like we've both tried different methods of doing the podcast. Like, what if we had kind of written out our talking points, go through our talking points? Or do we just kind of like freeball it and just talk about whatever? We found that we do a little bit of a mix that helps us. We do need to have some sort of outline, but for the most part, we do kind of freeball it. If we totally freeball it, I think we just start going on these rants and tangents. And that's when like editing becomes a nightmare because we have to cut out so many things where we're just like thinking or like it doesn't make sense and we have to backtrack and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah. I remember one episode I was editing was just me going on a tangent about like go where you're wanted, which is like it sounds all good, you know, in the summary, but like when you listen to it, it's just me going on a rant about like I'm going where I wanted, I'm finding a new job, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to cut basically 10 minutes out.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so it sounds like there were some experimentations with the process of how you were doing episodes, but it was really like the editing process that you recognized, okay, this is not working, or like this is making things harder. How did you know? Like, was there something during the recording that clued you in that that mix was a good feel, or was it mostly that editing process for you?
Well, we did little check-ins at the end of each episode to be like, oh, how do we feel about that? Is there something that felt off and things like that? So we just kind of like gave each other feedback to see. And then the editing process was where I really saw like, okay, this is probably where we need to work on certain things, try to stay more on track whenever we get on certain topics and things like that. But I feel like our little feedback chats, because I think that helps both of us just point out things that we notice for each other and help build each other up.
Yeah. And also, I think there was one episode, I can't remember which, but there was one episode where, or maybe it wasn't one episode, but we sometimes record episodes, 2 episodes at a time. And I think there was one time where we recorded topics where it wasn't like the person who was leading it wasn't the one who created the topic or thought of the topic. So that made it difficult for the person. We typically the person who does the introduction is the person who's kind of leading the episode. And I just remember we both feeling like, okay, that was a little rough because like this was your idea, but I don't know if this went in the direction that you wanted it to go. So maybe you should lead it next time.
Oh, that's really funny. You know, I'm a solo podcaster, and so when I think about that, even that moment of feedback at the end of each episode, I wish I gave that to myself because I do not. And when I think about the benefits of starting a podcast with a friend or a colleague or someone that you have that shared interest with. Ooh, that was my next question. What are like the topics that come up for episodes on the show? For people who are listening, they're like, what do these amazing people like to nerd out about? Because I like to nerd out about things too. And so how can people know if it's the right show for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of nerd about anything that we're interested in. Also, things that come up in terms of like discussions that we talk about with our clients. But I mean, we've talked about video games and a lot about how, especially types of video games like RPGs, so role playing games, how that is connected to mental health and how we see that play out for not only ourselves but also our clients. We we did a mini series on the TV show Arcane as well, and about how some of the relationships with the characters, how we can see some of those relationships play out in other relationships, or how we relate to some of those characters can give us insight about our own stuff as well. And then there's like the totally random ones where it's like, I remember one time I made Natalie, yes, I will say this, I made Natalie do an episode on fan fiction and on tarot cards. And Natalie was just like, I don't know anything about this, but sure, let's do it. So
Also, like for context though, like I do know about fan fiction, but it had been like I think almost two decades since I last like really got
that's
into
what she
fan.
says.
So it was like it was that comparison of like, okay, I did know about this topic, but I don't know about what this topic is about now in this age, you know? And I think sometimes that's kind of what it is too. Like I know a little bit about a topic that Zori introduces, but not enough where I feel like I have a whole lot to contribute sometimes.
So video games, TV shows, movies, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm so into that.
Yeah.
I'm not really a podcast listener. And so like whenever it's like something that I actually am thinking about in my off time, like that makes it really interesting to me. And so I'm really excited about this kind of like mental health and pop culture and like experiential things like video games. Can you give people an example of like a video game that's maybe helped a client in your work together? Because there is this tie back to the clinical work that you do. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of video gamers. So I call myself a geek and gamer friendly therapist. And so what that means is that I do draw a lot of people who identify as geek and gamers. And contrary to what a lot of people believe, I'm not just working with like your middle-aged man who has not left their parents' house and, you know, isn't successful in life. Like the people that I work with range anywhere from like kids and families working on like boundaries and healthy habits around video game playing to like adults who really are, you know, they are struggling to figure out how do they balance video games in their life. And also like people who just simply identify as video gamers and they like to talk about that. They don't want to feel stigmatized when they speak to their therapist about it. I have clients that are so excited to talk to me about like the new game they just started and how they're going and stuff like that. So a lot of the work that I actually do on the clinical side with video games is like it's kind of twofold. Some of it is that like I use video games as a medium to build skills, to explore different topics and things like that. So like I would do Minecraft a lot with some of my kiddos that I see, just because that is equivalent to like a sandbox activity in the therapy world. And so like you can find video games that have different ways to incorporate different therapy topics, and to utilize it that way. I've also used like video games, like I've watched somebody like build their character and or show me their character and tell me like why did they make certain choices about their character that they built, and then that helps us, you know, kind of figure out like what kind of things do you feel about yourself or believe about yourself and things like that. So that's kind of how I integrate video gaming. And that's the same with like geek culture things too. Like I like talking superheroes too, because I think we all see a little bit of superhero and villain in ourselves. And so like that's always a great topic to talk about when like people relate to certain superheroes and villains.
I had Dr. Sheena Howard on the podcast, and she was talking about her book about Black Panther and Wakanda and mental health, and how so many people found like healing experiences during watching the film. Is there maybe like a movie or film that comes up maybe again and again for your clients in terms of their ability to talk about emotions or something?
Maybe I'm just thinking of this because I noticed your hoodie, but I'm thinking about Totoro and Miyazaki movies. I definitely talk to clients, especially I'm thinking about like either movies like Spirited Away or Kiki's Delivery Service, where those are movies where I felt this, but also I had clients who felt this, where it's like transition in some shape or form. Like Kiki's Delivery Service, like I watch that anytime there's like any big changes happening in my life. So typically, like moving, new school year, Kiki's Delivery Service, and we definitely talked, or I've definitely talked to clients about like one, it being a comfort movie, you know what to expect and how that can help bring like a sense of control, especially in times where it doesn't feel like you have control, but also elements of Kiki talking about like burnout, talking about you know, when something that you love turns into like a side hustle and then it's not something that you love anymore. And yeah, so like we've had conversations sometimes about that as well. Obviously other movies as well, but like I said, the Totoro made me think of Miyazaki, made me think of like Kiki. So yeah.
And Inside Out is one that comes up a lot with me and my clients. And I think that's just such a great way for people to, I think, conceptualize themselves and different parts of themselves. Because usually when we're talking about Inside Out, it's because we're talking about like the part of them that gets angry or the part of them that gets sad, and talking about how all these parts are okay and how do we get them to all communicate and work together so that we don't overload like the brain, the command center, and things like that. So that's definitely like a movie that comes up a lot. And then also like there's a lot of Disney movies that have come out that has a lot of cultural ties to it that resonate with people. And so like those are the things that tend to come up a lot too. Like Zori and I have talked on our podcast about Encanto. We've talked about Turning Red, and those have some deep cultural ties and family trauma and things like that. So that's, you know, when clients bring up those kinds of topics, or those movies, is because those topics are embedded in those kinds of movies.
I really appreciate that. So, is there any topic that has come up that like you really want to talk about, but it's not quite right for the podcast? I guess I'm curious about like, it sounds like everything is something that you're interested in, but how do you decide when something's like not quite right for the show? Does that make sense?
I think, or I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, but at least for me, when I'm thinking of like topics, I think of like, is there like some sort of like show or like some sort of like essentially medium that we can talk about it through? And I think that's helpful. Um, like I remember one time Natalie mentioned something about like, and maybe I'm remembering this wrong, Natalie, but like relationships and like like singlehood or something like that. She was like, "Do you want to talk about that?" I was like, "I can, but we need to think about like how we're going to tie it to something geeky." And I mean, I was actually thinking about this earlier. I was like, maybe I have an idea, but yeah, I think I think just because we try, it's therapy on the tangent where two therapists talk about geeky passions and mental health. It's like, okay, here's the mental health, but what's the geeky passion, you know? But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes we find that there are themes in therapy that come up in certain seasons of life. I think like just different parts of the year brings up different things for people, and like we kind of want to talk about this topic, but then like how do we, like what medium do we talk about that topic? Like what kind of geeky thing can we pull into? And I think that's where it gets tricky, because then it's, if we just talk about the topic, I don't know if that derails too much from what we're trying to do then. But I think there's lots of topics that, like, from a mental health aspect, we would love to talk more about. It's just how do we tie it into like the theme of our podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You are coming up on your 1-year anniversary of the show, or has it already happened?
I think it's probably already happened.
Yeah, it probably has.
Yay! Okay, cheers! Celebrating 1 year. I am curious if we go all the way back to like when you were starting. Zori mentioned that was kind of one of the slowest or maybe longest parts. What was it like when you were just starting? And then maybe like what might you do differently if you were just starting now?
I mean, we spent a lot of back and forth on like names of the podcasts, on covers. Like I would send Natalie some covers and she'd be like, no. Or she would show her partner and he'd be like, no. And I was like, yeah, I think that was part of it. And then just also figuring out like, what are we going to talk about? Exactly how this is going to look.
Oh, I'm just, for everyone who's listening, I'm going to switch over to the title screen so you can see the cover. What helped you decide on these colors and like this cover, because it's really pretty. It like stands out.
Oh my gosh, it's been a while. I think I was just trying to go for like a like retro video gamer vibe. So like especially when we first started like putting like social media stuff about our podcast, and even sometimes Natalie like leans into it. Sometimes she's just like no, but I like try to do it where like Natalie's player 1, I'm player 2 type of thing, like old school video games. And so especially before the podcast came out, I was trying to like play around with like the loading, like game loading type of thing. So I think that's just what I was like leaning towards. And trying to also video games, headphones, and like movie reels on it. And also I just like yellow. So
I tried to let Zori have the creative direction and all that. But I think part of in the beginning, I felt a little insecure about myself in starting another podcast. And so I think that's kind of like, I don't know, how do we represent ourselves? How do we get people's attention? And I do really like the colors, and I really like the design that we settled on, because I do think it's like eye-catching, and I think it invites people to be like, what is this about? What could this possibly be about? So yeah, I think like the creative aspect of it was the longest and toughest part in the beginning for us. And also this was kind of like, we're just kind of podcasting for fun. So it's not like we're here trying to spend money. So it was also like, we're doing all these things ourselves. So it just takes a little longer. And then we eventually probably need to upgrade our equipment. Like Zori had to get a new microphone just because like the sound quality was so bad in the beginning, and I had to do so much work on it. So I think like that's like just the logistics of getting through like the creative process, and then getting our setup correctly, and then getting to this point where it feels a little bit more smooth. Like that was a process.
Okay, so if we are at the starting point, like it sounds like the investments in like microphone and stuff came over time. What was like in terms of equipment, like what did you need to have to get started? Or what did you feel like you needed to have?
Yeah. So I mean, part of it is just how we're going to record. And again, though I think both Natalie and I could like have figured it out. It was really Natalie who figured it out, like how could we like MacGyver it. So we used Discord, and then Natalie does some sort of like magic on her side to record it.
Yes. So a little bit of lore on me. Like I've dabbled into streaming for a little bit. And so I knew that I could probably capture everything on OBS or like Streamlabs. And so that's just kind of how I MacGyvered it. I was like, okay, we're going to do it on Discord, and then I'm just going to screen capture it, save it that way, record it, and then that's how we're going to do it.
I love that you already knew something that you were familiar with, and you were like, this will work. Let's just go with it. I feel like a lot of professors that I chat with, like I don't help them start podcasts, but a lot of people get stalled by the tech, trying to explore so many different options and make the best decision for them. But oftentimes it's the best decision for us right now. And I really appreciate that you were open about that process. Okay, so technical stuff. It sounds like you had a solution that worked for you, and then you just recorded, and you have the editing skills to do it yourself. How did you get your editing skills?
Oh, that's just a lifetime of me getting interested in random things. So I think it's just throughout my lifetime I was interested in like I was interested in like the Adobe suite basically. So I had dabbled into like Photoshop and Lightroom. I've dabbled into different like video editing software. So I started learning on Blackmagic, which is an open source video editor. It is much more complicated than the average person needs to know. So it came from a random interest that I had where I just have acquired like skills in certain areas. I am in no means great at any of these things. It's just I know how to use it from me being interested in using it. So I don't think I'm the best editor out there, but I do think it's passable.
She's definitely better than me. I'm just using my early 2000 AMV animated music video skills on iMovie. and like sometimes I'm just like, ooh, that could have been smoother. So Natalie is doing a really amazing job.
I really appreciate that. I do not have great video editing skills. I have Demo Creator by Wondershare, which is mostly for like tutorials because I have to record videos for my website design clients so that faculty can know like, oh, this is how I can edit things on my website once it's live. I don't want you to have to like come back to me every time you need to change. And so when I think about the tools that I've learned, like it's quite limited. Whereas my husband is like doing all these certifications in video editing and like learning all of these skills. And it's like 1,000 steps beyond what I will ever be interested in knowing. And so I'm curious about skills that you've learned since you started. What skills have you been like, oh, I'm kind of surprised that this is something that I needed to focus on or like didn't realize would be so important to what I do now? Any skill building that I should know about?
I mean, this is coming up for me because it was one of our most recent episodes, and it's probably a skill building area of growth, partially because I was the one who was doing it by myself, but guests, having guests on the podcast, definitely a skill that needs to be built. We had the wonderful, amazing Dr. Brian Rose, who is a friend of mine, talk about his dissertation on Black video gamers, which was great. I think it's probably one of our best episodes. The feedback is, and you know, we got this from a lot of sources, including my mother, was you know, some of the things that I as a host should have been like, hey, this is what this is, or hey, can you explain that? I could have done better. So I think that's a skill that I'm realizing that could be better. And also it's funny because that's something that Natalie and I do all the time as counselors, dive deeper, but for some reason on the podcast I'm just like la 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 la. So yeah, I think that's like taking some of my more counseling skills and delving deeper, but also making sure that I don't unpack someone's trauma who's our guest on the podcast when you. So
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe that's part of why it didn't come as naturally as maybe it does in clinical work. I think about that a lot because we're like live here on the Social Academic now, and like, what does that mean for people who are showing up? And decision making about how to have an episode is different for me now than it used to be because I'm thinking, oh, like what happens if people are asked something they're uncomfortable with? I may have asked you something that you were uncomfortable with, but the reason that I like having guests on the show is because it really helps me talk about things that I don't think would come up on my own. Like, I don't think it would come up starting a podcast with a friend because I am a solo podcaster. And honestly, a lot of the people that I know are solo podcasters. Like, they don't necessarily have someone to brainstorm ideas with or share some of the workload of editing. So what's something that is like maybe better because you have each other that you're like, oh, I'm so glad that we're doing this together? That's the question.
I think for me personally, I can't just talk to nobody. Of course, like there's an audience, there's a virtual audience out there, but if it's just me just kind of talking, I think I have a hard time with that and having a hard time figuring out like maybe what direction I even go in. Because initially when I wanted to start podcasting, I was like, okay, how do I do this? Because I definitely need to talk to somebody else. Otherwise I can't hold a conversation with myself, basically, I think is what it came down to. Or like, I didn't know how I was going to present what I wanted to talk about if I didn't have somebody to interact with. So I think like that's what makes it better for me, is that like, it feels more natural talking to a human being for me than for me to just like talk to some space out there that I don't know who my audience is. I don't know who's listening, because I'm somebody who likes the feedback from other people, like the nonverbal communication that I observe from other people. I think that's what helps me to figure out like, how do I talk to somebody? How do I move in certain directions?
Yeah, and I think I'm the opposite, where if I were to do it by myself, I would just talk because I'm an only child. I've learned to talk to myself from a very young age. And sometimes, especially listening back to episodes, I'm like, oh, look at Natalie, reeling me back in, summarizing what I was saying that took like 10 minutes to say in 1 minute. So I really appreciate that about her.
And maybe that's the difference in like our upbringing too. I'm one of 3 children, so I think that's where I always had someone to talk to. So I've never had to just talk to myself before, or at least like if I talk to myself, it's in my head, and then that's me talking to me, and that's different than if I were to podcast. So I think that's where it was helpful to have Zori, because I don't know if I want people to hear what my conversations are like in my head.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Okay. I'm curious about kind of like the social and emotional journey of sharing the podcast, because I feel like there's a lot of people that like they have the dream of starting the podcast, but then that other side of like actually telling people like, not only do I have a podcast, but like going and like repeatedly sharing new episodes with them, like that can be uncomfortable for people. So like, what's that like for you to, I don't know, be open that you have a podcast?
It was definitely scary at first. Yeah. I mean, I told my mom and my grandma, and they're both people who will tell me exactly how they feel about it. Um, but yeah, I think part of it's scary, but part of it's just like, this is something that we want to do, and people are going to listen or not listen.
Yeah, I think that nervousness was definitely there for me too, and it was really scary, putting our podcast out there. Um, I think part of it is that I felt very vulnerable too, because I think in my life I try to keep like my professional self separate from like my personal self. And so there's something that felt very vulnerable of like, okay, somebody in my personal life is going to hear about like, what do I sound like professionally, or when I talk about a certain topic that I'm knowledgeable about in my field. Um, and so I think that's part of like where the self-consciousness came in. Like, what if I sound like a dummy, and now all my friends and family know about it? Or like, even the people in my life who didn't necessarily know like I was working with like geeks and gamers, like what are they going to think when they listen to the podcast? Or do they even think that the podcast in general is dumb? Because I think throughout my life I've heard people say that it's just childish, for people to be so into like video games and anime and all this pop culture things. But like that's something that Zori and I really love talking about too. So I think like it was that kind of self-consciousness and that fear of like, what are people in my personal life going to think about this? And then I started sharing this professionally too. Whenever I did like presentations or workshops, I would have a little QR code that would link the podcast too. And I think that was me just trying to like get over the hump of like, okay, this is something that you do and something you should be more proud of, instead of just trying to like hide it. I wasn't hiding it away, but I definitely wasn't promoting it as much as I think Zori was too. So yeah.
Oh, I was promoting like, okay, I have a podcast, well, bye. And people were like, wait, podcast? Give us the link. Tell us what it's about. I'm just like, oh no, being perceived. Don't like this.
I really relate to that, because when I started my podcast, I literally did not tell anyone. I didn't announce it on social media. The episodes were just there along with the blog post that was already existing. And it really took me a while to be like, oh, this is actually something that is intentional that I'm going to share with people. It's not just for increased accessibility. Like, I want to be proud of this. And I started thinking about myself as a podcaster, even though that was a label I never expected or wanted to have. It was something that was a reality of the action that I was doing to record audio episodes. And then eventually I started these interviews, and like, I just feel like so much has changed, and now I share every episode. So, is there any part of you that feels like there's still something that you could like improve on when it comes to sharing your episodes or sharing your podcast with people?
I mean, on the social media side, I think I could be better at preparing posts. So like even we've had a bit of a break just because we were both have a lot of new things happening, me moving, stuff like that. And I had this thought where I was just like, oh, okay, I should like do like the greatest hits of our podcast. Or one of the things that Natalie and I do at the beginning of every podcast is talk about our current geeky pleasure, like what we're geeking out about. And I was thinking like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I had like a list, like Natalie's list, Zori's list of like, geeky things, and at least to like keep our social media like up and running. And again, I was moving to a completely different state, and I just didn't have the energy or time. But I was just like, if I had thought about it, if I had like taken time to like do that before I moved, then maybe I could have at least like schedule post some things and stuff like that, because the social media algorithm is a beast. So yeah, that's one thing that I can think of.
Yeah, I agree. And I think on my end, because I don't create the social media posts, I do think I could give Zori some more content for the social media post, because I think a lot of times she's like, hey, anything I should put on like the social media or anything you have for me, and generally be like, oh, I don't know, I didn't even think about that. So I guess I'll pull something together. Usually it's like something about my cats then, if we have nothing about the podcast. So I think like that's something that I need to continue working on, like just being able to like partner with Zori to provide the content, especially because I don't do any of the social media, and nor am I great at it. So I don't even think I would be very helpful if I actually did the social media part of it. So
Though I will say, two of our most interactive social media was one, this video of Natalie's cat Neptune kind of just like plopping down on the ground. And I was just like, the feeling when you don't have a new episode of Therapy on a Tangent, people respond to that. And then there was a second one where I think I messed up the introduction to our podcast. And Natalie was like, how dare. And she put like some weird, funny like sound effect in the background. And I was just like, wow, this is perfect. So she has a talent. I just had to like keep poking her.
It sounds like if you collaborate, it comes up with like lots of fun things that's not just about the podcast, but about kind of behind the scenes stuff, about real life. And that kind of mix is what really helps people get to know you. So not only are you sharing things on your show about your interests and the things that you're nerding out about now, but you're also open to that part on social media too. I think that's unusual. I think that there's a lot of people who avoid doing that in a way that is almost like hiding ourselves. I really like that it feels like authentically you.
Maybe it's like the therapist part of us that
Mm.
kicks in, because I think something that Zori and I both kind of practice is that like we want people to know that we're real people with flaws, because I hate that illusion of like, we've got it all together, because there have been numerous times Zori and I have just texted each other like, yeah, life's falling apart. We're doing our best. And I think that helps other people just be more comfortable with the idea that like our lives aren't always going to be together, and it's totally fine. And I think that helps other people be more comfortable being authentic when they see, especially like a therapist, when you model that to clients, they're like, okay, so it is okay that this professional that I'm seeing isn't always perfect or isn't always like having it together. That means I could let things slip sometimes. I don't always have to be perfect.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times, or I know I have clients who like think that about me. And honestly, one of the reasons why that I keep thinking back on, especially when I think about our podcast, is I worked with some teenagers like a few years ago, and one of them was telling me how like, oh, I shouldn't be reading fan fiction anymore. I shouldn't be writing fan fiction or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why? I do it. And they're like, what? You, an old person, is still writing / reading fan fiction? And I was just like, yes, I am. I'm still an adult with an adult job. Wish I was making a little bit more adult money, but yes, you too can read and write fan fiction as an adult. Like
One of
um
my first guests on the Social Academic Video podcast was, I don't even know if it was video, it might have been audio only, was my friend Dr. Jessica Doble, whose dissertation was like about fan fiction, like about how people interact with it, about how they think about it and create it. And like when I think about the things that we love that we limit for ourselves, it makes me really happy that a podcast like yours exists and that a friendship like yours exists to have even sparked the idea in the first place. Um, this has gone on a little bit longer than I expected. So, just to keep us on track, like, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you're like, oh, I want to share this with people, or I have this tip for people who might be starting a podcast? Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I don't know if this is helpful for starting a podcast, but I think when we started, we kind of set the bar low. And we were just like, we're just here for fun. We don't really care if it's ever going to take off. It'd be cool if we got monetized or sponsored, things like that, or if people started calling us for speaking engagements and things like that. That'd be cool. But we're really just here for fun. And I think that really helped us just kind of take the pressure off of like starting it, because this is where like we went back to our production was so like low budget, because it felt like we didn't have to have this professional, setup, and we didn't have to figure everything out. We could just kind of figure it out as we were going along. So I think like just kind of lowering the stakes for you really helps to just get over that hurdle of starting. Because once you start, I think it's easier to stay on a roll.
Yeah. And I think, especially for anyone else who may want to do a podcast with their friend, I think you do need to talk about things. I know there's been some instances, mainly because of me, where where Natalie and I had to have some conversations. Because I was being a diva for a second. And, I think you have to, it's a partnership, and you have to be able to like have those hard conversations. And because sure, you can have a great relationship on air, on the mic or whatever. But if, even if it's for fun, even if it's for, the money, which hopefully that'll be, but still for fun, I think you still have to want to talk to that person, not only for the podcast, but like outside. And again, we haven't really been doing a lot of podcast stuff, but like Natalie and I are still like talking, and mostly me being like, moving sucks. Where's my couch? But I think you should be able to do that with your partner, with your podcast partner, but like any type of partner as well.
Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on The Social Academic. How can people find Therapy on a Tangent after this ends?
Yes. So we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere where you listen to podcasts. And you can also find us on the link tree that's being shown as well. We're also on Instagram. Yeah, just type in Therapy on a Podcast and you should find us.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much. And for everyone listening, we'll be back soon with another episode of The Social Academic.